He is alive with energy, no question. His gait is powerful and frictionless, capable both of covering ground effortlessly and penetrating dense cover to flush and retrieve game. So we're looking for energy, power, and frictionless. His enthusiasm in the field and the incessant action of his tail while at work indicates how much he enjoys the hunting for which he was bred. We have a merry cocker. Do not ever, ever forgive shyness or lack of temperament. His head is especially characteristic. He is above all a dog of balance, the word I preach all the time, both standing and moving. So if you can't get it when you move, you haven't got it. You've got to be able to do both without exaggeration in any parts, the whole worth more than the sum of its parts. And this is the total dog thing that I keep preaching, and I hope that made some sense to you. I'm going to ask if Eugene would like to pick up with some talk about whatever he wants to say. I think he's supposed to talk about setting up a breeding program and a breeding line and choosing your dogs and your bitches for breeding purposes, and then we'll get together and we'll just bounce off questions at that point. Is there a question at this point you want to deal with?
Yeah, just before you go away, could you touch a little bit on what creates correct bed-of-cycle when the length of bone is correct if you still don't have the correct bed-of-cycle?
Could you say that question again? I want to be clear what you're asking. Could I touch it?
You can achieve a dog through the length of the three bones.
Right.
Correct.
Right.
He's a little straighter in the style. He does not have the correct bend.
He usually has no second thigh. He's usually lacking in muscle and second thigh muscle. So I think what you probably need to be focusing on is roundness of quarters, and very often that kind of dog is narrow through the loin. So I would be focusing on that. See, sometimes, what is happening here is actually being caused back here. It's sometimes hard to say what causes the dog, and I'm not really that worried about what's causing it to happen. I know it's happening, and I want to work to avoid it. And I would say probably in a dog like that, if you're dealing with an animal that has the three bones in proportion, and they are in proportion to the shoulder as well, remember, they're in balance with your shoulder assembly, then I think you're also going to be looking at a concern about, does he have the width over the loin? Is the coupling correct? What is the croup angle that I would also pay attention to? Eugene, come on over.
When Ginny and I were sitting together just a couple of days ago trying to work out what each of us was going to say, I told Ginny really my task was going to be very simple. I only had 4 words to say, and that was, I agree with Miss Lyne. Seriously, where we agreed to split up the work was she would talk about what she considered are the essentials of a good cocker, and I would talk about how I went about selecting a brood bitch, how I went about selecting the stud dog to be bred to that bitch, what I did in terms of line breeding, how I selected an outcross, and that type of stuff. In other words, I'm going to concentrate mainly on the breeding aspects. But before we even talk about the breeding aspects, I think it's very, very important that you must know what you're looking for. So know the cocker, what Jenny has been talking about, what constitutes a good cocker. You have to have that picture fixed in your mind. That's the very, very first thing. The second thing is you must be brutally honest with yourself, because it's so difficult for most of us. Most of us have a home where we have maybe 2 or 3 cockers, and we may have 1 breeding bitch or maybe 2 breeding bitches, and to have the courage to sit back and say, no, she's not good enough for breeding. It's a very hard thing to do. But the fact is, a good 70 or 80% of the bitches we breed from maybe shouldn't be bred from. If you just remember this, if you start with an animal which is basically incorrect, and you hope to get a stud dog which will correct all these things, You will not do that. It's going to be very difficult. It's going to take you 3, 4, 5 generations. You are making for yourself the work of, if you go, say, 2 years to a generation, maybe 10 years before you come to an acceptable specimen, assuming that you succeed in all your steps. It's far better for you, if you can possibly do it, to say, all right, if this particular bitch doesn't fit the mold, what I should do is go and look for another one. And if you cannot, because she's your pet and she's your life, then she's your pet and she's your life. But it doesn't detract from the fact that she's probably not correct for breeding. So that's very important. You have to remember that. It's a very hard thing to do. Now, what do I look for when I look for a breeding bitch? Looking around the ring at this national, I see one thing which is very, very disturbing. We're getting bitches which are small, bitches which lack bone, and although I didn't go over everyone, from the way they moved, it looked to me as if they lacked some of the very fundamental characteristics that I look for in a brood bitch. Now, remember what Janine said, a cocker is a compact dog. It's a dog with a lot of power. Look for the bitch with a lot of bone, with the substance in it. If you find an animal which, very rarely will you find the top show bitches being also the top producers. Generally speaking, it's the bitches which are maybe a little overdone, who don't have quite the quality about the head. You look at the head and say, well, you're a little doggy. You don't have the very appealing chiseling and the lovely eye, perhaps. You don't have the eye shade, perhaps, that really makes a good bitch, a really good show specimen. But if she lacks in those things, which are more or less, for breeding purposes, a little more superficial, it doesn't really matter. Look for the bitch with the bone and substance, with the nice depth of chest. When you put your hand on the front of the bitch, and if the head's facing that way and you cup it there, you want to feel an egg. If you put your hand down there and feel, and then you just feel the point of the breastbone, and your hand goes straight down, there's nothing there. You know that the whole shoulder girdle is too far forward. And if you get that, and if you want to get rid of it, you say, okay, you select for a stud dog. What you're going to do is, even if you find a stud dog which is good for that, the next generation may not carry it, and then you probably have to go another generation to correct it. As I said earlier, you're making a lot of work for yourself. So look for those essentials: the bone and the substance, the correct placement of the shoulder, a good top line. Sometimes, if she's a tad on the long side, well, you can forgive that perhaps, because again, it's sometimes the really short bitches don't produce the size of the litters that you want. But you don't want a long bitch, but try and keep it within reasonable limits. Strong hindquarters, and this is very, very important. When you look at the bitch from behind, you should see that roundness. You don't want the narrowness and the pinching that you see coming in quite a few of the others. You want, basically, I mean, there's an expression. You want a bitch which looks like a harlot. You want the big bum, the big hips, basically. Sorry, that's the best way I can put it. Look for the bitch which feels heavy to the touch. When you pick her up, she's got a lot of heft to her. If you find if the bitch which is maybe a little lighter, lacks when you feel it, you feel, well, there's not much weight to you, those are not the right bitches to have. And when you pick them up, after a few minutes, you feel, God, you're heavy. Not fat, but heavy. So those are the points I look for. I look for not necessarily the perfection in head and eye and stuff like that, but the strength that you want the bitch to be able to give to her puppies. I'm very concerned with our breed at present because I see a lot of very small bitches lacking in bone, and I don't know what's going to happen in the next generation. I hope that somewhere down the line we'll be able to breed them up a little bit in size, but this is a phenomenon which is happening not only here, but also in the United Kingdom and a few other places. For some reason or other, we're getting dogs of reasonable size, but very, very small, slight bitches. So we've got to try and correct that. Now, are there any questions about the bitches?
Do you think we can bring our bitches' sizes up better by outcrossing, line breeding, or inbreeding?
Okay. The question is, can we bring our bitches up to size better by outcrossing, line breeding, or inbreeding? There are two factors here which come to play. One factor which is well known is hybrid vigor. And if you do breed to an outcross, you will find that your offspring will, generally speaking, get to be bigger. All right, that's one thing. So that may be one factor. But you can also, if you are conscious of the fact that you are getting smaller animals, and you try and consciously breed for a bigger bitch, you can line breed and yet still keep size. But of course, if you've really got yourself into a corner whereby your bitch is getting insubstantial and small, you have no choice. You have to go out. Any other questions about selection of the brood bitch? Jenny spoke about two things which I think are, sorry?
I was going to say, you didn't mention anything about temperament.
Yes, I was just, Jenny mentioned two things, two basic things too, which go without saying. You want a sound animal, sound from the point of view of temperament, sound from the point of view of structure, sound from the point of view of movement. I have found that if your bitch is a little tough, not only will you get tougher, you will get tougher puppies, but this happens from, I'm not sure whether it happens because of the genetics or because the puppies learn it. I think it's probably a little of both. The sweet bitches, the sweet mothers, the ones which are gentle with their puppies and you know, caring for the puppies, usually I find have the sweeter puppies. Now, and I don't know the reason for this. There's something, obviously, if you read some of the articles about in Time and other magazines about what happens to babies when they've just been born and are going through the first 2 months of life. There's obviously something which happens, almost like an imprinting process, which does teach the youngsters. And I have found that really the pitches which are you know, more forgiving, a little sweeter, those are the bitches which also produce those puppies. Now, that's on the point of view from the point of view of temperament. Would I breed a tough bitch? In extreme circumstances, I might think about it. But if the bitch is one which is nasty, under no circumstances would I use it for breeding. And by tough, I mean sometime one which is maybe, you know, if it's provoked, will to some extent will attack back. But and some bitches are like that. But again, one must be a little careful. Now, so for sound in body construction, we've talked about that. We don't want any major faults. Yes, you will find some which are maybe a little straighter in stifle, a little straighter in shoulder. Don't go for an extreme animal. Don't go for an animal which has the extreme hind angulation, or, you know, go for one which has maybe a little longer neck, because as Jenny told you, it goes with a longer back. Go for a more moderate animal if you can. And lastly, in terms of movement, if the animal is obviously unsound in movement, again, that's something else which should go against it for breeding purposes. So many, and of course, unsound movement comes from you look at the two ends and from the side. Looking from the rear is very simple, of course. You want the animal to be moving truly, no cow hocks, no bull hocks, be driving straight back. That's very simple to see. Looking from the front and from the side is sometimes not quite so easy. But you want an animal, and in my view, which, and when it moves, doesn't have to roll the shoulder. If the animal's rolling the shoulder, there's a reason why it's doing so. It's a compensatory mechanism, and you see some of these animals which are moving this way. And if you do that, you'll perpetuate that, which is not good. If you look from the side too, sometimes, if you find that the body is rolling this way a lot, It's usually another sign that somehow the shock from the rear has not been absorbed with the front. It's compensating again. That's another factor. If you see that the animal's sidewinding, ask yourself why the animal's sidewinding. Why is it not moving in a straight line? Usually the reason, again, is that it's compensating because it's probably got too much drive for the amount of shock that's been driven, and the front cannot take it. So these are the things you should be looking for. Don't necessarily, in other words, what I'm trying to say is look for a good, sound, moderate bitch, maybe larger than smaller, certainly more substantial than less substantial, and don't necessarily look for the pretty bits. The pretty bits can be put on later. All right? Now, let's talk about the pedigree of the brood bitch. I believe in a bitch which is line bred. The bitch which is line bred will, one of the old breeders talk about preparing a bed where you're going to plant your flowers. The bitch has got to have the genetic material which is going to enable her to produce something which is true to her type. Now remember, I've been saying, choose the moderate bitch of good type. Basically, that's what it is. So if you want to put the fancies on, you can usually get that from the stud dog. But you want her to be able to put onto her puppies the basic cocker type, the basic balance and structure which she herself has. Now, for her to be able to do that, she's got to have the genes to do that. Look at her pedigree. And you have to understand what the pedigree says. The fact that one name appears 2 or 3 times doesn't necessarily mean that she's line bred. You have to know what that name means. I mean, if you look at a pedigree and you see a dog like Ransfell Newsflash, you must have a picture in your mind what Newsflash looked like. If you don't, it's meaningless. Or if you look at a pedigree with, say, Cimarron on it, you must have a picture of what Cimarron looked like. Don't just go by the name. And then, with that imprinted in your mind, look at your bitch. If that dog appears 2 or 3 times, look at your bitch and say, can I see the good points from that dog in this bitch? If you cannot see the good points in that dog and that bitch, the pedigree means nothing. So you must be able to follow it through. Okay? Does everybody understand what I'm trying to say here? All right. Now, is there anything else any other questions about looking at the pedigree? You all know, I'm not going to insult you by asking you whether you know about the difference between line breeding and inbreeding. I take it you all know that already, so we won't bother about it. But that's the way I go about things. When I look at the pedigree, I have a picture in my mind of what are the most important dogs there, and I look at the animal and say, okay, do you have it or not? Has this been passed down? All right? Now, you've got your bitch. Now you're going to select the stud dog. Now, this is where I think, where I look to correct faults. Maybe my bitch has all the essentials in terms of the rib and the substance and you know, the general soundness, but I would like to maybe put her in the air a little bit, up in the air. I will go to the stud dog, which is a little taller. Or maybe she needs to be prettied up in head. I will go to the stud dog, which has got the head qualities, or maybe it's the eye color, which has the eye color which I want. So I go to the stud dog to correct my bitch. That's the way I do it. Now, again, in selecting the stud dog, apart from the obvious of looking at the physical aspects, characteristics of the stud dog, the 2 things which I think are fairly important. One is that you go the safe route. To go the safe route, you look for a stud dog who is line bred himself. Now, if you look at this dog and you say, okay, gee, he looks really nice. He's got the head qualities which I want and the lovely dark eye which I want. And I look at his pedigree and see what's in his pedigree, just as I looked at the bitches and see whether those characteristics have been passed on from that forebear to the bitch. I look at the same thing, because if the dog has been what they call chance bred, in other words, if he's got it, but it's not in his forebears, there's a good chance that he's not going to pass it on. So to play it safe, look for the line-bred dog, generally speaking, which has the characteristics physically to correct your bitch, but who comes from a line which carries the same thing. Let's talk about one thing which is maybe in a lot of people's minds, shoulders. okay? If you find the stud dog, if your bitch is maybe just a little upright in shoulder or a little coarse in shoulder, and you're looking for the dog which will correct that. Yes, the first thing you do is you look at the stud dog which has the lovely shoulder. Then look into his forebears. That's the very next step. If he's a line-bred dog, does he come from a line which carries good shoulders? And because if he doesn't, he probably will not pass it on, or there's a good chance that he will not pass it on. Now, to look to the next stage, you can't line breed forever, because sooner or later, this is something maybe which Kay was alluding to, you will find your stock, if you line breed and line breed and line breed, you'll find that your stock starts losing some of its vigor, and you have to go out. And after a while too, you'll find that if you breed within a line, don't forget, just as much as you're fixing good points, you're also fixing bad points. And after a while you find, look, I've got to go somewhere else to try and fix some of these other points. And this is where it gets very difficult, the selecting of the outcross. Now, let me tell you how one of the most successful outcrosses I did, in my view, was this outcross to Jenny's dog, Ransfell Newsflash. First of all, you must remember, this is a dog. First thing you must remember is that very often when you use an outcross, in your first generation, you will get garbage. What you're doing is you're hoping to bring in genes which, when you tie into your own dog, will produce what you want. All right? That's the very first thing you have to remember. The second thing you remember when you're doing an outcross, at least I do, is you look into the dog's pedigree. Maybe 5, maybe 6 generations away, you want to be able to see something which really ties into your own family tree. If you go for an absolute outside cross, then you get a fruit cake, and there's no predicting what's going to happen. So look for a dog, extend the pedigree beyond your 5 generations, and see what there is in there. I looked in Newsflash's pedigree, and I said, this is very interesting. If you go back into his pedigree, you see he comes back from Coast Guard, from Lariat, and stuff like that on one side. And you go back on the other side, well, Jenny called him an outcross too. Yes, and he was an outcross. But even if you look on the Canobo Capricorn side, and you will go back for enough, you go back basically to Lariat and the same dogs again. So from that point of view, and because my own line also went back to Lariat, that was a very interesting dog to look at from the pedigree point of view. The second thing which I do when I look for an outcross is I do not select a closely line-bred outcross. The reason is because although you want to bring those genes in, what you want to do, presumably you've been breeding for 5 or 6 generations, 10 generations to produce a type which you want to produce. No, you don't necessarily want to produce something which looks like the stud dog, but you want to bring in certain qualities which a stud dog has. If you use a stud dog, an outcross stud dog which is closely line-bred, and your bitch is closely line-bred, you have war. What you want is to, in my view, is to choose a stud dog whose pedigree is sufficiently open that you hope he will bring in the genes that you want, but maybe not be so dominant that he will dominate your line completely. So that's that's my principle when I look for an outcross. You look, just reiterate. First of all, go way back into the pedigree and see that it comes from basically the same taproot. Secondly, when you look at the dog in terms of his pedigree, don't select one which is too closely line-bred. Because what you want to do is you get maybe the best bitch you can from there, and then you go back into your own line and you go from there. So what I did was I took my line-bred bitch from my old Collinwood lines, basically, bred it to Newsflash, got the that generation, the first generation, bred it back to my emblem dog, who was closely line-bred, and then we start producing dogs. The bitch which went on to produce Charlemagne. So that's what that's what I try to do when I select my outcross. Now, you can. The question is, how far should you go in an outcross? I don't think myself, because in the first couple of generations you have to treat them almost as throwaways. I don't think it matters whether you go to a solid, like a solid to a solid, or a solid to a party color. I like quite often to go into a party color outcross line because some of the breeders in the past have found, and I have certainly found this so too, that it gives you the biggest scope. If you breed, for instance, red to red, red to red generation